Okay, awesome. So thanks for joining me today, Randy.
Thanks for having me.
I don't remember where I first heard your name or heard about your work, but it sort of all came at one time. I
Okay.
was you know how that happens? Like
Yes.
it's synchronicity where like someone probably had told me your name or about your work, and I was like, okay, and then it kind of builds where the second person and the third person.
Right.
And I remember in January, I was at Rachel Cook's CEO retreat, and Teresa Reed was there.
Okay.
Um, and in person, I felt like I was meeting such a big celebrity because in the spiritual world, you know, the tarot lady's quite quite
Yes.
well known.
And yet a lovely, amazing human being.
Amazing. Well, that's what meeting
She's a
her in
sweetheart.
person and just snuggling, being around
Yeah.
her all day. And boundaries came up and she said your name and said, guys, if you don't know about Randi Buckley, please go follow her. Please pay for her programs and learn so that you can really align your businesses. Because all of us, you know, we were in a room with, I don't know, there's probably 150 women who run their own businesses, right? Who also
Mhm.
wear the mom hat, the wife hat, the community leader, right? All the
Absolutely.
things.
Hmm.
And since Teresa said that in January until now that I'm really tuned into it, so much of the suffering that a lot of our community are really going through is around this lack of boundaries and
Yes.
not really having role models, other strong role
Right.
models. And one of the things that I noticed is that I have slowly been really integrating over the past, I would say 5 to 10 years. So very slow. um,
Some
but
terms are very wide.
I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, so I'm always like navigating what's soul service versus like what's boundaries and all that kind of like
Mhm.
stuff I love to think about. Um, but I have learned so much about boundaries from actually my best friend who we were just talking about, Anna Guest Jelly. In
Yes.
fact, I told Anna this yesterday. We were on the phone and I said, you know, I've really learned boundaries from you. And then Elizabeth D'Alto, who
Hmm.
is another, you know, spiritual podcaster, writer, thinker, Nicole Antoinette. And I noticed all these women don't have children. And I was like, oh my
Absolutely.
gosh, I'm learning all this stuff about boundaries from women who don't have children. Fascinating. So that's my long intro to how I invited you to come on,
Mhm.
talk about your work. How did you get started with this, being the expert on
Mhm.
boundaries for kind people?
Um, yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this, and thank you very much for having me. It's very nice of you and fun because I love talking about it. um, so the healthy boundaries for kind people work that I do actually is something I've always been pretty good at. I don't have a big story of how I struggled and then I figured it out. There are times where I could have been more elegant, definitely, and learned a lot of things on the way, but I feel like I hit the parental jackpot actually, with parents who sometimes elegantly, sometimes not as elegantly, had really strong boundaries. And my mom was one of the first jazzercise teachers. She was very into yoga and very had this vibe. And my dad was in the Navy, and at one point was a Navy SEAL and ran the ERs for the Navy. So where you have to be very, boundaries were important. So it's somehow in the mix in that genetic soup. I emerged, and I so boundaries only just one type of coaching I do. I do a lot with women who are ambivalent about motherhood, and they call maybe baby, and people who have big life decisions. And what I was finding through all of this, boundaries were a huge challenge. And the way people were looking at boundaries was very different than how I had understood them and how I implemented my life. It was always a source of guilt or a source of not enough or a source of being too rigid. And I
Mhm.
just saw it very different, in a very different light, in a way that worked. And what really came to a head for me, Pleasance, was when, and I have permission to say this, my sister had a string of wildly abusive relationships where here I was, her big sister, and I wanted to just like, what's going on? Why is this happening to you, this Spitfire? This person has immaculate boundaries in every other aspect of your life. I couldn't say that any of that to her at the time, as I would have alienated her. So I started channeling it into my work.
Yeah.
And Yeah, so a lot of the work, a lot of the Healthy Boundaries for Kind People work is really a love letter to my sister that I couldn't necessarily say at the time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so back up and tell me, what is growing up with a movement instructor and a Navy SEAL look like for boundaries?
It means
What is
you're very aware of your inner and outer worlds. It's not just being in your mind or being in your body, it's knowing both very, very well.
Were they
And
together? Did they stay together? Are they still
yeah,
together?
they're still together. Met on a blind date, actually. But there's a really awareness of the inner world, of one's thoughts and feelings, and then also a real strong awareness of what's going on around you and being strategic with that. And, I really learned from my dad, just, he's a very unimposing guy. He was pretty buff at the time, but just he could walk into a room and people would kind of perk up. And it wasn't that he was saying or doing anything, it was just how the energy he carried about himself. And that was an energetic boundary and that confidence. And so that was very interesting to me. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
And you picked up on, obviously, like growing up with that and saw that. Okay, so give me some examples of, like, were your parents very explicit and specific with you? Was it just you and your sister, or the other?
Just my sister and I, yes.
So were they very specific? Here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. We're very intentional, or was it more just how they lived and raised you, and it was just modeling? How did that
mostly modeling, and mostly modeling, and sometimes my dad, whenever we had things going on, they would both sit down and explain a little bit why things were happening the way they were. But there's also another element. Being a military kid, I moved around a lot, and so it was really interesting for me where we'd land in a new city. I would kind of watch things going on around me, like, oh, this seems like a group of friends that I would fit in well with. This is a group over here that I don't gel with. I'm not going to force myself. I'm sure they're lovely, but I'm not going to try to just be friends. Whereas my sister was much more interested in making friends and would drop her boundaries. And so there's also some kind of on-the-job training of how to negotiate what was right for me.
Yeah. And it sounds like your sister had more of the sort of typical role of, like, I want people to like me, and so I'll meld and mold in these different groups.
Right. And is also far more outgoing than I am. So that also probably had her, she was trying to meet that need, that extrovert need.
Was your mom, I think one of the things that so I live in DC, and
Sure.
Majority of the people in our community live in the DC area.
Right.
And when we gather in women's groups, in fact, one of the reasons I did reach out to you as well was because just in August, we were doing some intentional planning and thinking about sort of ending the year and what we wanted and what was happening. And at the end of the day, I said, who here, I'm just very curious, if you get a room of women together to ask kind of these really juicy.
Sure. What a great opportunity. Right.
So I said, who here had or has women in their life who express anger in a healthy way?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it was like crickets, right? Not one hand went up.
Uh-huh.
Who here has women in their life who express healthy boundaries, or they grew up in that kind of environment? And same thing.
Uh-huh.
No one.
Sure.
So that is why I said, okay, we need to talk about this. We need to pull in some resources. Let's have these conversations around what they are, what they look like in real life,
sure,
and how we build that muscle. So right. What do you think about that? And where do you think we are right now? And why is there crickets when we ask that?
Right, because so I usually find that when people don't have healthy boundaries or a challenge with them, there are one of 5 reasons, or an amalgam of 5 reasons. And okay. one of those reasons is never having seen boundaries done well or
yes.
at all.
Yes.
And so what's different about when I say healthy boundaries for kind people, compassionate, confrontation averse, nurturing people, when they understand boundaries, it often looks like some jackass thing that if you're kind, there's no way you're going to do that. You value kindness way more than allowing yourself to be this person that you don't want to be, or have these behaviors that you don't want to be. So you'll avoid that at all costs, because that kindness, that compassion is so important to you. What I think we get to, and I'll try to stay on with your question, but we actually get to, that's not my understanding of boundaries. So my understanding is that boundaries, and this is my definition, are really the architecture for the life you want to live. And that architecture is designed by values. So that it's less about keeping things out. And I think that's what kind of the general consensus of boundaries is, line here, other things on this side, I'm on this side. To me, it's about what we want to cultivate within. So within our communities, within our families, within our relationships. And I know you study Ayurveda. I studied with an Ayurvedic doctor for many years and was apprentice, and I taught around the world. And one of the ideas she had was this idea of abundant health. And once your health was so full, it could flow out into the world. And so I designed my whole, my concentric kindness concept is what I have this work based on, such that once our values are in concentric alignment, they then can ripple out into the world. And those values are boundaries. So I got a little off. I don't know if I did. But so there's a lot of that thinking in there, and we don't necessarily see people doing that.
Right. Why do you think that is?
Because they don't know how.
This societal patriarchy, like that coming down through the lines of our actual lives, and now this uprooting and awakening and shining light is showing us that. The other thing that I'm thinking about is that lately, like I said, because of access to these podcasts and each other's lives and ways of living, and like I live in this bubble where pretty much everyone in like a 1.5 mile radius around has very similar looking lives to myself, right? Kids that go to this one school, usually they work in the government or lawyers or whatever, it's DC politics. So, but
I've lived in DC. I've lived in DC.
Oh, you live there, so and here I am in my little world of, I don't know, spiritual woo-woo teaching and studying and finding other souls who are not within this bubble and learning how, this woman lives this way and this woman is doing it this way, and that's so interesting, and I haven't been exposed to that, so let me try it here. So for example, like on the day-to-day, someone will email and say, can you come to this, can you volunteer for this school event? Here's the sign up. And it's sort of assumed that it would just be yes, and everybody who can does. But lately, over the past few years, I've been more intentional about trying to take the pause before the yes, to see if it really feels like a yes, or it feels like I should be doing this because everyone else in the neighborhood is doing this. Right.
So,
So I just want to hear about like your clients and the women that you work with all over. What is their experience with day-to-day life? Like, how are these changes and shifts happening for them? Where is it showing up?
Sure. So I think a lot of people would really resonate with what you just said. There's an expectation of yes. And one of the things I teach, that boundaries are actually an act of kindness, whereas we are, the situation you just explained, used as an example, feels like if you were to say no, it'd be unkind. To me, saying yes to something that I don't want to do is unkind. Not just to myself, but to somebody else. It's disingenuous, right? So there are kind ways I can do that, and I need to honor my values. But really, if your kindness does not include yourself, we are an equation, right? So if your kindness does not include yourself, it is incomplete. So in regard to the example you just gave, you hit the nail on the head. There's this awkwardness. It's like almost a rhythm. Will you? Yes. Will you? Yes. And we follow this rhythm. If we can get comfortable with an awkward pause. Because often what we're doing, we're just filling it, like with yes, and we're not even giving ourselves a chance to think about that. So what it looks like then is starting to do things that you want to do, and then you can do them. The things you do say yes to, things you do say no to, in that very binary sense, you're doing it because you want to, and it's going to be so much more fun. You're not carrying the resentment. We're not actually causing guilt in other people. Oh my gosh, you did something that you didn't really want to do. I feel so bad. Often we think, oh, I'm guilty if I don't do that. Whereas we're preventing somebody else from having that guilt develop in their life.
Yeah.
So it really looks like about realigning relationships so that you're honoring the values that are important to you. And that comes through small acts. It's quite revolutionary. It feels really simple, but to put it in place is totally, it's earth-shattering.
And this came up too. I'll use this example. I've shared it a few times because it was so clear at our live event too, because we were starting to talk about how it triggers in other people their stuff, their lack of boundaries, or their own wishing they'd said no when they said yes.
Yes.
At work.
Big time.
Yeah. What do you think about that, or what do you see?
So sometimes I think a lot of time when we say, we'll just go with that example, say no to somebody that we were glad we said no to, and they are mad, often they were like, you can do that? I think that frustration, first they're maybe disappointed because they just expected you to do it, and they had to rearrange. And there's a very big difference between somebody being disappointed in you and somebody not getting what they wanted. And I think that's a really important distinction. But often I think they're little shocks because we can do that? Wow, how do you do that? Why can't I do that? And so there's a frustration there. But it really changes relationships when you're nurturing or nourishing the relationship with a real yes, as opposed to a disingenuous one.
Yeah.
I mean, those are deep seeds that we plant that do sprout, and all those seeds sprout in one way or another later on. So saying yes to something we're not crazy about doing at the time will show up later in a different way.
Yeah. What are some other common, like some really common ways that you see people not having boundaries, and that maybe we wouldn't think are normal, or ways that it comes up that we sort of don't really talk about that you see are quite normal, or that are quite like a lot of women are doing it?
People pleasing.
Yeah.
People pleasing undermines kindness, and we often do it because we think it's the nice thing to do. Yeah. And in a lot of my work, there's a very big distinction between nice and kind. Yes. And a lot of the things we're doing in people pleasing are nice, and I don't knock nice because I think it gets a bad rap. To me, nice is manners. It's making people comfortable. It's being polite, and it has a place, but not to the detriment of kind, which is really taking a stand for what's important to you and what you want in the world. So people pleasing is a huge one right there. Feeling that we don't want others to be disappointed, which definitely goes along with people pleasing. I think we feel like we have to carry their disappointment if they are. That is huge.
Yeah.
Just saying yes to all sorts of little things that we may not want to do, or really being on autopilot, not knowing if we want to do something or not, but just thinking that's what we do. It's our routine. It's just part of the deal.
Where do you think people pleasing comes from?
So I mentioned those 5 reasons.
We didn't get through them, but I think we did.
No, I just mentioned the one. Ultimately, I think people pleasing comes from a fear of abandonment.
Yeah.
And it might not be that, I'm sitting next to this person on the bus and they ask me to move, switch seats with them, that we think they're going to abandon us. But those very deep root causes from when we were an infant, if we were abandoned, we would die. So I think we have this idea of keep people in our realm by keeping them happy. Keeping our basic needs met by keeping them happy. Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into the family world and the moms who resist and push back and say, I don't know where that line is. Isn't this what I'm supposed to be doing for them? This is what good mothering, especially on that spectrum, right? Those of us who had moms who may have been working multiple jobs and were not home baking cookies, then you often get the extreme where the mom in her, somewhere in the subconscious, good mom equals home every day baking cookies, right? All the needs because their needs weren't met, like that whole range.
Uh-huh.
So talk to me about your teachings and advice for moms and caregivers.
Right. It's different. I teach, I work with women who are contemplating motherhood or ambivalent about it. And, I say it's a little bit like going to France. You can learn French for years and until you're there, you have no idea of what exactly that is like for you in that context. Yeah. So the healthiest boundaried people suddenly get, spun out once you hit motherhood, because you are suddenly responsible for keeping those other people alive. Yeah. And so we think we have to do things that, extra things beyond that. For me, I teach, it's much more interesting to model healthy boundaries to your kids than bake cookies you don't have time to bake and then be tired because of it. Because to your point, you just said we didn't have those role models. So if we can start being those role models right away, that's one of the biggest gifts we can give. And those boundaries are consent. Those boundaries are understanding who you want to be in the world and being able to take a stand for that. My son has become a little, he's always been very big into social justice, and his values are his boundaries. If he doesn't think something's being treated fairly in school, he will take a stand for that. And I'd much rather have that than somebody who wants to, here, have my granola bar so we can be friends. Yeah. It's a different route, but we get to be the role models we wish we had in those situations and actually see that it is believing in people then. Instead of doing all these things to feel like, I want you to feel loved, I want you to, I'm going to do all these things. I'd much rather have kids feel like somebody believes in who they are, yeah, and who they can be. And that is definitely through boundaries. I mean, we could dissect this and keep going down and down, but I really think that's kind of a bottom line. Yeah. And if you want to make cookies and that brings you joy, knock yourself out.
Totally.
But it's when it's obligation,
yeah,
and you feel you're not showing up if you don't do things like that. I would really look at, invite people to look at the ways they are showing up and how those are incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from an Ayurvedic perspective, the trust. Like, mm-hmm. Trust is trust in the universe, trust in our abundance, trust in our own health, trust in our own unique expressions. If we're all interconnected, obviously, birthing children through our bodies is the ultimate sort of like, of course you're a part of me, but we're also all connected and all part of each other energetically, sure, and consciously.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Really honoring that. I think that's kind of like the deeper that I dive into Ayurveda over really the past few years, seeing it model in my own life. If I trust myself and my values and that alignment with, mm-hmm, actions,
yes,
it is radiating out. That is exactly how I'm learning. My kids are 10 and 7 now. Mm-hmm. So we're right at that turning point from really day-to-day wiping butts kind of care, right? To, uh-huh, like, okay, now make your lunches and your breakfast and get yourselves to school, and right, I'll be here to support you after. So there's kind of a big shift that we've been feeling, and relaxing, instead of tightening around them, mm-hmm, as they're becoming more themselves. My husband and I are holding each other's hands and right, like trying to lean back and just, yeah, relax and just allowing them to, mm-hmm, have their own experiences. And for us, we definitely don't feel like we're in a community that really supports that type of parenting. Uh-huh. So we let we were at a pizza place the other day, and there's a really famous, awesome bookstore, like 2 doors down. Mm-hmm. And there was a new book that came out. My son wanted to see if they had it. And I gave him my card. He can use his allowance, but sure, he takes it out of my card. So I gave him my card and I said, okay, take your sister and you guys can go get it and come back, and we sort of like, my husband and I like held hands, and he was only 2 doors down and all that. But we had a conversation, other people, quote unquote, other people like don't let their kids do this. And
Right.
we could get in trouble for this because people get cops
Yeah.
called on them for this now. And are we okay with that? And, just trying to, again, align with those values together and then take actions and allow our kids to have experiences actually feels like we're having our own set of values and alignment and boundaries,
Right.
even though it means they are now free to sort of walk down the street and buy a book and come back.
Oh, I'm so glad you do this, though. It's because it's going to be so good for them. But the reason they are free to go down the street and buy a book, because they have a certain set of boundaries they work within, too.
Yeah.
You've taught them how to be out in the world, and you're teaching them how to be out in the world. And they really know if they're in a jam, they could turn around, hightail it. They know how to get out of the situation because you've given them boundaries and that parameter to work within. So I love that you're doing that. And what it probably will start to do, even if you get some pushback or weird responses from people, is it's going to open their eyes as well. Yeah. I'm a bit of I'm very rebellious. So I'm very happy to be the one who kind of breaks that mold in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, but to me, it's fine if it works for you.
Yeah. Well, and what's so interesting is that I feel like I can honor and own my rebellion or true self when and this is how it all links back in my world to Ayurveda and like that deep nourishing care for self, is because when I'm rested and feeling good and energetic and like my needs are taken care of, I can clearly see that. Like I can clearly say to you, if you were to come up to me at the restaurant and say, what are you doing? I could say like, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is what we believe. But when I'm exhausted or on the autopilot or how I really was, like I'm one of those stories where I ran around in like a hamster on a wheel and checked every box and did all the good things and was like, where's my award? Here I am. And then when I realized there wasn't one coming, I was like, oh man, I gotta find a different way to live. This isn't working. And I lost like 70% of my hair and, just like autoimmune all over the place. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah. For me to wake up, right?
Yep.
Which is fine. It is like how it is. But I'm not able to see that clearly when I'm running around and trying to keep up with everybody else or trying to make all the money in DC or trying to do all the things.
Right.
It's only when I feel, and for me, those little things are like making sure that I take baths pretty much every day or every other day. And I know that's super cliche right now and everyone rolls their eyes and is like, more baths aren't going to heal the world. But in my body, I have so much pitta that taking that bath is really
cool you down.
Really important for sort of homeostasis. So I just see it also as this reflection or mirror, like in general, this autopilot racing around and not being able to clarify why it's important for kids to walk down the street or walk up into the CVS or something, kind of have their own life is often when our lives are so out of control in so many ways that we're not living our own life.
May I offer you something?
Yes, please.
You don't have to explain it.
Yeah.
Explanation starts to sound like negotiation or that you're not actually sure yourself. Now, there are some times where it might be you want somebody to understand or should somebody call the police? You need to explain it to them. There are contexts where that might be appropriate and the right thing for you to do, but you don't offer anybody an explanation for any of that. You do what's right for you. And I think that's, that did not come up when you asked me the question, and it very well could have, and where we kind of have all these boundary violations in our own life. We constantly feel the need to explain what we're doing, to justify it, and the things we don't. And again, if it's a really important relationship to you and you want somebody to have a better idea or understanding where you're coming from, that's different because that's serving you as well. But to joke in public, whatever we say, you don't have to explain. It's really nobody's business anyway, but we feel that we either have to justify it or get buy-in, but it sounds like we're not sure ourselves. Yeah. It's okay.
Yes. And I always think about sort of like period, like this is what I do, period.
Right.
And that's just it's not, it doesn't come easy to me.
Sure,
I
sure.
a lot of, I hear it a lot. And now that I've been paying attention to how much I'm trying to explain myself or explain why I do what I do or have those patterns, I now hear it in other people. So
Exactly.
I'm noticing more and saying to myself mentally, like in fact, I'll write emails. I'm not available. And then I'll go on for a whole paragraph about why.
To explain why,
And
right?
then I
How
stop,
sorry you are about that.
I look at it, I see what I'm doing, I
Good for you.
highlight the whole thing, I delete it, and I put,
Right.
I'm not available, period.
Yep.
Oh,
And,
I mean, but it's,
and I love this because that's clear. What a gift to somebody.
I know.
And I have to read through, wait, is she available or not? Is she asking me for help and I don't understand something here? Oh, the clarity of, I'm not available then. Thank you for asking. Is an amazing thing. That is a healthy boundary. And that is understood by somebody. So it's far more likely to be honored.
It feels energetically so much better to have that clarity. Do you feel like a lot of with your work that it takes people time to see this and watch it unfold? It's not like take this one pill, learn this one.
Oh gosh, no. I'll have people after our first session or first class feel like their world just shifted. Yeah. And then throughout the course or the work, they're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more. There's so much more. To me, because boundaries are everything. And so you keep uncovering more and more layers. We look at the past and the messages you got around who you are and worthiness. And it keeps, there's so many layers and so many layers. This is what I call a spiral dance. Sometimes it feels like we're doing this again. I thought I was past this. I'm doing this again. But the thing is, you don't realize that you're getting closer to the source every time. So it's constant. So I have people who even after the first session feel like it radically changed their trajectory, who still have done the course 5 times. Mm-hmm. Because they're uncovering more and more and more. And I'm not saying you have to do that to make it, to read a book 5 times to make it work. You might you can read the first time, but there's constantly more, and it does take time.
Yeah.
Boundaries are like a muscle.
Yeah.
So I have this whole metaphor methodology and analogy methodology I use, and that's one of the first ones because it takes time to build a muscle. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to necessarily pick up your biggest, heaviest boundary challenge first because you don't have the muscle for it yet. And what's so juicy about that is there's muscle memory. You can always start building muscle no matter how late in the game it is. And I think that's really helpful to remember when people are starting to look at their boundaries. It is like a muscle. It will take time. That doesn't mean you're not going to start getting change and results right away, but you're going to get stronger and you'll be able to do things with greater ease, and you'll uncover more about just like how you might understand your own body more. You'll uncover more about yourself as you go on.
Yeah, it's such a layer. It's such a connected layer with the sort of same visuals of spirituality and health and like the layers. And that's how I feel about Ayurveda. Is I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll just be, I'll be studying the rest of my life, sort of, this layer and now
There's
this
always
layer.
more.
Look how it's connecting to this. That's so cool about this. And that's why I like these fields of study where you can really, we're not getting anywhere. Like, it's not like, check, boundaries, got them, check, and
right. Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
No. And it's never one and done. I mean, in terms of boundaries, I say boundaries are like a river because sometimes we ebb and flow and there's a little eddy over here and they dry up. Then you've got to reroute. So it's never the same stream twice that we walk into. And so really, because we're not the same person, we evolve, we learn different things. Our capacity for something might be greater at different times, a lot less at other times. So it needs to be, I also say boundaries are flexible like a spine. They need to be able to bend and flex to support you. We know in Ayurveda that the spine is, healthy spine, healthy life is what the ancient texts say, right? And that's because it can flex and be strong at the same time. And I think that is very indicative of what boundaries need to be as well.
Yeah, and I think it also, now that we're sort of digging into it, I'm thinking about the layers of, we have a few sick family members right now, and I don't live close to them, and so this is why also it's not a one and done, and why it's a muscle, and we're still going to be working with it because we've never been in this situation before.
Yeah.
So what I'm navigating and really thinking about is, what do I have? Where are my values? Where am I aligning with how I want to show up in these supportive relationships with
Yes.
ill family members and changes?
Mm-hmm.
And I, this summer, so this started happening probably about 6 months ago, and then more intensely really in June,
Okay.
when someone got sick again, and we had to make some family decisions. And I decided on July 1st, my community knows this because I've been talking about this a lot, is that I woke up and was like, you got to quit drinking. Like, it just was like a hit over the head, divine guidance, like, to move through whatever next phases are arising. It's like, alcohol cannot be blocking basically,
Sure.
I think, the boundaries that I want to have
Right.
in order to raise my family, run my business, be a wife, be in the community, have my own life, and help with this family stuff that's 6 hours away.
Right.
It was like something, in order to simplify, I've got to create some space. And this one thing will help. It just may really help.
Sure.
And what I'm noticing now is that it's the first time I've faced anything really hard without alcohol.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, this is uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, look at that. Holy crap. Yep, it is.
Lots of lion's breath, lots of walking the streets up and down like a crazy, I always say, like, I look like a crazy person because I'm just trying to move things, just trying to feel it. And then I, get in bed and read my books, or just relax, or get in that bath. And this week was as things got a little bit more intense again with the extended family, it was kind of like, okay, well, are you coming? Like, we need more help. And I could feel the pressure, and I could feel my stomach start to tighten, and I could feel myself want to say, I'll be there. But my body just listened. I didn't respond with action, So I say that because of this layering and unfolding of, like, these situations are going to come because people we love are going to be sick, or we're going to have challenges, and we're going to have to make these decisions about what really feels good,
Good for you. That's really tough, but it sounds like you're listening to what is true and finding new ways to navigate that river to a place you've never been, and you absolutely can do it. When you said that, what came up for me, if I may offer a question, pose a question that I offer my clients a lot. It's one of my favorites, so they're probably all rolling their eyes, but it's a good one. If you're unsure what to do, what will you be glad, 5 years from now, what will you be glad you have done?
Yeah.
And that's one I actually find I'm posing to a lot of people who are working with elderly parents, with family members who are sick, whether it's extended, because in the moment we just might feel frustrated, overwhelmed, just mad about, somebody said they picked somebody up and they didn't, and now I have to make this big decision. It's completely unrelated. But I really like that question because it actually takes us out of the moment. And this sounds so ridiculous. Takes us out of the moment almost so we can be more present within it.
Yeah.
If we think 5 years from now or a year from now, whatever is appropriate, makes sense. What will I be glad I would have done right now?
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective, and it's really helpful. I love that.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
What do you think? And this led me to what I wanted to ask you next, which was about archetypes and personalities, and any patterns or habits that you see in there, because I definitely feel like there's a lot of women in our community who feel really passionate about service, right? And that looks a lot of different ways, especially in DC, with the variety of protests and ways that we can really activate right now. I mean, today, literally every single day at Congress, they're asking for us to come down and do stuff for the Kavanaugh hearings, and trying to navigate that piece. So what would you say for archetypes or the ways that we are, our personality, and the habits of that?
you said something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I thought it was right on. And that is your way of doing something, finding what is in contribution in the way that is real, very much an extension of you. So if it's feeling like you have to go do something that is not just beyond the bounds of discomfort, sometimes we need to step in that, but something that's just not you, finding the way you can contribute. Because I think if we're all trying to do something in one or two ways, we're not actually going to have that much impact. But if we do it in ways that are natural and an extension of ourselves, that's coming at things from all angles. That's actually what's going to help. Because if we're trying to fit this archetype and fit this mold right here, and that's the only types of pressure it's getting, it's not going to have that pressure. And it's not going to be that strong because it doesn't look like it's coming from all types of archetypes. So doing something in the mold of who you are is extremely powerful. I think more powerful than trying to step into something else of not who you are. And again, that doesn't mean avoiding discomfort, because a lot of these things are wildly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And there's a line between discomfort and safe. We have we need to honor our instincts and boundaries there, so we're not putting ourselves in unsafe situations. But if I understand your question correctly, no, there's not only one way to impact the world. The biggest way is by being fully you, in honoring the boundaries of who that is. Yeah.
Well, I think also in terms of health imbalance and balance in Ayurveda, right? And the doshic imbalances is that because we're all made up of all the elements, but having this really intense pits of fire means that I could actually get a lot of people from the community. Yeah. I could go start this. I can do that. Oh, hi, Kitty. Is he cute?
Oh, yep. That was the yelling in the background.
I have to honor the little, animal that was
absolutely.
So that's also the layer of trying to navigate the strength in a healthy fashion versus an unhealthy, because that habit has led to burnout. That gift is also the weakness.
Right.
And that's where I can get really sick, is when I'm over fired up.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. So for you, it's really, you have to look at your prakruti and vikruti, right? And your prakruti, it's there, but looking at the vikruti where the imbalance is. And so you're not throwing too much fire on or wood on that fire. But not also, oh, now it's raining. It doesn't have to be one or the other, which is so common in Pitta, right? That you're very extreme either way, or that you're full tilt until you hit a wall and then you crash. Yeah. So, going with that, what's going to just have you at a healthy boil so that you can use that steam to good things, but the fire is not causing you burnout. In other ways, you're not getting burned by your own efforts, which I think is probably right on for anybody who's trying to do anything, make big things happen. It's really easy to get burned by your own efforts, which is not healthy, because then you're not able to keep having that effort.
Yeah. What do you look for? How do you help people talk about or get more specific on what healthy looks and feels like for them?
It's it's an incredibly individualistic question. To me, healthy is when those values are getting honored. Quite honestly, when all those values are getting honored and not at the cost of yourself. Obviously there's some cost because we are the fuel for those things, but you're still having it be replenished in a healthy way. And that will look different at different times in your life. If you have a sick family member, your capacity is very different than what it might be at another time. If you are dealing with cramps, your capacity might be different. So it's kind of constantly ebbing and flowing. But for me, healthy is when, it's really hard not to go to Ayurveda now because I know you speak this language so well.
Let's do it. Go for it. I love it.
So when it, the whole idea of toxins is so discussed beyond the point of understanding toxins in Ayurveda. But we understand when there's an excess or something that is not keeping something in a healthy state, that is the limit. At that point, it would become what we call toxic, whether that be a relationship, a food, a thought. It's, one of the very first things I have, and maybe you do this with your yoga work, but I have my clients do, is to stand up and say, now balance on one leg. And they'll say, okay, I'm balanced. I'm saying, what are you doing to keep that balance? Well, they're actually doing a million different little micro movements
Yeah.
all the time. So it's not this still point where everything is just complete and static. It's us constantly adjusting in conscious and unconscious ways, and that's what gets to happen to keep things healthy.
I love that. I love that visual. And I know I can just go right into the body, just kind of feeling that wobbliness and then like breathing into it. And I think that underlying all of it, it is the paying attention. You know, I think it's the commitment and the desire to really have varying layers of paying attention to our inner world as we're affected by the outer world. And I know a lot of our community just rolls their eyes and feels like, oh, it's one more thing. And sort of the underlying mission is always it's lifestyle, not one more thing. It's not part of the to-do list. It's about that inner exploration.
Absolutely.
Figure out your seasons and cycles and adjust them.
Yeah. And to me, when somebody says it's one more thing and they feel overwhelmed by that, it's actually one less thing. Because you're actually stepping back and seeing all those things and not trying to have to hold all of those things without looking at it. But it's the taking stock and inventory very briefly in moments, you know, in just a moment of time of what that is and adjusting.
I love it. Last thing I want to just say is that coming out, I think tomorrow, my neighborhood best friend is a parent coach.
Oh, cool.
We were on the phone the other day ranting and raving in a not so kind way about the coaching industry and marketing to pain points.
Oh my gosh. All right. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I shout? Sorry.
When we just recorded a podcast episode with we sound like one of those old comedy sketches from In Living Color, like the two ladies out on the front porch, well, do y'all know that they do this? Do you know that they do this? And so we did this whole thing, and partly because I'm in the process of doing enrollment for our Thrive holistic learning group, Sacred, and I keep sitting down to write emails that are I don't know, we get together and it's sacred and it's really fun and you'll learn really interesting things about yourself, so join or not, and if you don't want to, that's okay, and if you want to, great, we're here. And it just reminds me, I've seen a lot of your work come out, and I really honor how you present it as well, because you don't feed into the pain point frenzy, and you don't try to put the knife in the heart and then twist it around to convince them that you are the answer and there's one way.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Because that drives me nuts. It's manipulation. It's manipulation. And one of my boundaries, my biggest boundary, is respect. To me, that's disrespectful. I'm not going to do that. Even if I think that's somebody's case, that's me using, that's gaslighting. That's all these things. Oh, I can't see it. So you'll actually find, this might be what we're referring to, every sales page I have for any offer, whether it's boundaries or other things, I always say, if anything in this page has made you feel you are less than that you have a fear of missing out, that any of these things, I am not the right person because I don't want to help cultivate that for you. Because you're not, you're going to be fine. I want to be able to help if I can. That's cool. If not, we're cool. You're not.
We feel the same way, and we feel and we actually, the reason the name of the episode is marketing manipulation. Super in science too, marketing manipulation. Because what dawned on us is that people don't really know, unless you're literally running your own business and studying the online marketing piece or marketing, you haven't necessarily heard that. You don't know that's what people are being told. You're just clicking subscribe and sign up. And we had people who signed up for this round who were talking to our community leader saying, I'm so afraid I'm going to fail or not do it right or this or that. And she's like, whoa, hold on here. These are experiments. You are fine. You are wonderful as you are. We're sort of getting some, I'm noticing people are signing up, clicking one more thing because they want that hit, or they've been so abused.
Fear of missing out, and if I do this, maybe I'll actually have my act together. And this must be the missing piece of why things aren't working yet, and all sorts of things. I work with kids every summer, and the biggest thing I heard from kids this summer, which was different, and I've worked with them for 30 years now, was their fear of failing. and that somebody was going to think they were a failure. That's the biggest, I've never heard it to that degree before. And it's this idea that if we don't do things a certain way that we think is actually not failure, that it is. And that's not the experience of life. Life is traversing and traveling and doing our best and getting knocked down and getting up. I don't want to manipulate somebody into working with me.
Yeah.
That is so disingenuous, and to me, it's not respecting who they are.
Yeah.
If I have to manipulate somebody to work with me, I would not feel very good about my skills. Yeah. So thank you too for not buying into that. And my boundaries are such that I respect people. I will not do that.
Yeah. I just think I didn't realize, because when I was in the yoga studio world, the language is just very different for operating studios.
Sure.
And memberships and classes. So transitioning over the past few years to doing more of this, I've been surrounded more by this language and had business coaches who said, I mean, it's almost like a broken record. Would they say over and over, what's the pain point? Go for that. What's the one thing you're selling? What's the one, go, that's how you'll be successful, quote unquote. And my life is I'm very aligned. I feel so much appreciation every day for our community and our students. And I don't feel less than because I'm not doing that, but I don't know, it just messes with my mind sometimes. And now I'm getting more experience talking about it and aligning with I'm trying to look for, I think that's also why find you, find Megan, look for my other soul sisters who are like, no, we're fine. We're okay. And we're going to do it by being honest and sharing our experiences and what we've learned, and we can help you,
It's absolutely. And, if we look at maybe if people don't understand how it can work otherwise, we understand people's pain points. That's why we're doing this work. I'm not saying that you can't bring it up or something. If I were an orthopedic surgeon and you were coming to me for a broken leg, I wouldn't stand in the office and press on your leg and say, so you want to feel better? Come have your surgery with me. I would be compassionate the fact that you are in pain as opposed to exacerbating that. Exactly.
So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
The last thing I want to ask you is, so I'm teaching at American, and this just came to me because you said about the kids' work. How old are the kids that you work with?
7 to 18. So we do foreign language immersion in 14 different languages. Mm-hmm.
Do you speak 14 different languages?
I don't, but I help I'm a part of help run the Norwegian program with Concordia Language Villagers. So this is a very different part of my boundaries than my boundaries.
So I'm teaching a course at American University this year I have 9 first years, 9 fourth years, 1 sophomore and 1 junior. So it's a real mix. What is your best advice for these undergrads about to enter the real world in college? Because you just said they're afraid of failure. So what would you say to them, or what can I share with them from your wisdom around the work that you've been doing and integrating?
The failure doesn't mean they're a bad person, and that it's actually part of the process to mastery. And you're going to fail with things that, if you're not failing, you're probably not doing it right, actually, in terms of failure, because you're not trying it out. You're playing it awfully safe. And it doesn't define who you are at all. And I think we have this idea that if we fail, we're a bad person and people won't love us, if we really boil it down. And if they are feeling that from their family, just know that their family is clearly inelegant in expressing their love to them, because I'm sure they love them much more than that. Yeah. But good luck with your course.
Oh,
how fun is that?
It's so fun. I feel like it's the biggest gift. Just being able to integrate, and there's a textbook, Randi, and the textbook is all, the research and the quotes and the books on mindset and compassion and John Kabat-Zinn, and it's all the things just put into an actual college textbook, which to me, it just makes me laugh that there's a textbook called stress management. It breaks my heart, because on one hand, we've come to a place where this is something that is being taught and is stressing people out to take stress management.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at this textbook as just like such a gift because it's
That's
a
great.
collection of quotes and research links and books, and Wayne Dyer's in there. I mean, it's just fun to see all of these wonderful teachers be
Mm-hmm.
honored in a university, in American university, right? It's not Naropa,
Sure.
it's not Boulder,
Right.
it's not places that are typically, it's really a mainstream. Our class is in the public policy building, which is a really beautiful, I feel very like just honored to be going in there every day and be teaching. You know, we sit for 3 minutes, we breathe, we stretch, we talk about the real stress, we talk about boundaries, we talk about expectations of parents, we talk, I mean, and what's just amazing to me is these students have, I mean, it's basically like the same conversations and words that I have in the sacred women's circles on Sunday nights, you know?
Right.
And so that to me is like, oh, it's just so affirming for these connections of humanity.
That's great. That's wonderful. Yeah.
So I'm glad that that it really takes a lot, I think, for the department to make it a 3-credit course.
They clearly see that there's a need.
Yeah, right.
That's
So
great.
I think
And they're willing to meet the need. That's
really
great.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Randi, thank you.
Thank
For
you.
chatting with me. Where can people find you?
At myname.com, R-A-N-D-I, Randi with an I, Buckley.com.
Okay. I will put a link in the notes. And thank you so much for all of your wonderful teachings and the work that you do in the world. I highly, highly recommend that everybody get on your mailing list so that they can feel that authentic, your values coming through. And the desire to really help all of us kind people have better boundaries so that we can have that abundance and health that we've been talking about. So
thank you very much for having me and for all you're doing too.
okay,
How cool.
Take care, Randi.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.